Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. So today we're going to learn how to make this weird sort of bouncy, texty, titly thing. Took me ages to think of that title. This is my very first Davinci Resolve tutorial, so be a little bit nice in the comments if you don't mind, a little bit kind. Probably isn't the best or simplest way to do these things, but it's how it's worked for me. So yeah, leave a like, a subscribe, leave comments if you know any better ways to do what I'm doing. But without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so we're starting in the edit page on Davinci Resolve, and we're going to create a new fusion composition. To do that, just in the media pool, right click, select new fusion composition. You can name it if you want to, just for the purpose of this. I'm going to leave it as it is, but I'm going to change the duration to 8 seconds. Don't know why, just like the number 8. Click create. And the fusion composition is created in your media pool. If you double click it, it opens up in the fusion page. So just make a bit of room. So let's talk about what we're going to do. So we're going to create a blank background, which is going to have letters displaying the word bouncy title. The letters are going to bounce around the screen and then all come together, forming the word bouncy title. But we're only going to use 4 keyframes to do this. So let's talk about how we do it. I'm going to set up a background first of all. To start with, I'm just going to leave the background black just so you can see what is happening. And we need to create particles. If you've never worked with particles before, don't worry, it's not that complicated. Believe me, if I can do it, anyone can do it. But if you set up a particle system, a basic particle system, the first thing you need is a particle emitter, which is this icon here. And then you're going to need a particle renderer, which is this icon here. Whenever you're working with particles, you will need a renderer. Make sure the two are connected. If they're not connected, just drag the output of the particle emitter into the yellow input of the particle renderer, and then we can drag the output of the particle renderer and we can merge it over the top of the background. And straight away, if I zoom in, you can see that it's created some particles for us. So it helps if we can understand a little bit about what the particles are doing for when we come to create our letters. So if we click on the particle emitter node, come to the inspector, we can see that there's 5 tabs across the top. Controls, sets, style, region and settings. We're only going to look at controls, style and region. Controls, first of all, we're not going to go through all of these. We don't need to. Obviously, you can have a play around with these if you want to. But for this, we're just going to look at the number, just to analyze what this is doing. So it defaults to 10. So what that means is that it creates 10 particles each frame we go forward. So if we go to frame 5, we'll see that there's 50 particles on the screen. If we go to frame 10, we can see there's 100 and so on and so on. And lifespan is, again, defaults to 100. So what that means is after frame 100, these particles would disappear. They would die. We need to make some changes to that, which we'll do in a second. Style is what each individual particle looks like. So again, we're going to change that. At the moment, it defaults to point. There are lots of options you can look at. The one that we're going to want is bitmap. So if we change that to bitmap, the particles will disappear for a bit until we tell it what we want the particles to look like. But you'll see straight away on the emitter node, we have a yellow input now, which we didn't have before. So what we want for this example is some text. So let's add some text in. Just using the text plus. Again, just the way I created that on the text icon here. Click on that, it'll bring it down into the workflow. Connect it up to the particle emitter. Again, we've got nothing in there at the moment because we haven't actually given it any text. So if we type in the letter B, you can see straight away now we have 10 letter Bs, because if we click back on the particle emitter, we were asked to create 10 particles at the start. So it's created 10 letter Bs. Region, again, defaults to sphere. So that's why we have these particles created inside this circle in the middle of the screen. What it does is it creates the particles randomly anywhere inside this circle. Again, we don't want that. We're going to make some changes there. So let's start setting up what we want. So first of all, we just want one letter B. And the way we're going to do that is in controls. Again, remembering it was creating 10. We don't want 10. These are our first 2 keyframes. So on the very first frame of the clip, we're going to set our first keyframe. We're going to change this number to 1. And then we're going to come forward 1 clip. Or 1 frame, sorry. Again, we click our second keyframe and we're going to change the number to 0. So now you can see we have just one that's been created, and it won't generate any more across the duration of the clip. We also need to change the lifespan to at least last the length of the clip, which I've got at 240 frames. I'm just going to increase it to 1000, which is the maximum it'll go to. Obviously you can type it whenever you need to. But now we basically have one letter B. If we press play, we have a very tiny letter B at the moment, which just sits in the middle of the screen. We want to make sure that we can control exactly where this letter B sits. So again, if we go back onto the particle emitter, click on region, and we want to change the size of the sphere to 0, bring it all the way down. So now the letter B sits right in the middle, and if we look at translation, again in region, in translation, we can start to move the letter around, the X and the Y axis. Hopefully you can see that moving around. So what we now want to do is change the text size and color. Now the simplest way that I found to do that, or to start with anyway, is just in the text node itself as normal, just to change the size in the usual way, and then to change the color, and let's make it a red. I also want to give it a background, so in shading, I wish I hadn't selected red now, but in element 2 you can enable the background as normal. It defaults to red, which is why I wish I hadn't selected red, but let's just change it to, I don't know, give it a bit of background. Now what we can also do in the particle emitter is in style, we have size controls here, so we can again start playing around with the size of the letter. This is a little bit more flexibility. I'm going to increase the size actually just a little bit. There we go. That's about what I want, I think. So what we've got now is our single letter that's been created. It's in the middle of the screen. So I want to place it down at the bottom of the screen, and I want it to spell out the word Bouncy title. So the first thing I need to do is on the particle emitter, go back to region. In translation, if you remember, we could move it around using the X and Y offset. Just want to move it to roughly where I want it, at the bottom of the screen. And that will do for now. Okay, so we've got our first letter set up, which is a good start. What we need to do is to create the word Bouncy title. So again, the way that I found to do this, the simplest way that I found to do this, is to copy the text node and the particle emitter node, and to paste this the number of times that you need each individual letter. So obviously the number of letters that you need to spell out the words that you want. So I'm just going to do that now. And having done that, what I'm just going to do just very quickly is to rename each text node so I know which letter is which. And the way to do that is to click on the node, press F2, give the option to rename, and I'm just going to simply type in each individual letter. Made a mistake to start with, can't spell. Okay, so I'm nice and tidy. I've given each node its individual name, so I know which letter corresponds to which node. Obviously what I need to do now is just very quickly go into each node and just change the letter itself. Okay, so now I've got each individual letter set up. I've got the node set up so I know which letter is which. So how do I create the word Bouncy title? So what I need to do is to disconnect this emitter from the renderer here, and we're going to merge each letter over the top of each other. And the way to do that is to take the output of the particle emitter and just drop it onto the output of the emitter below. It creates a merge, and then the output of the merge onto the next particle emitter, and so on and so on. So we're effectively merging each letter over itself. And when we get to the last merge, merge it over, click on the last merge and take the output of the last merge, and we're going to connect that to the particle renderer. And what will happen as soon as I connect that is it will create a big blob in the left corner. And the reason it's doing that is because at the moment each letter is sitting on top of each other. So what we now need to do is to move each letter across. so that it creates the word Bouncy title. So we've already put the letter B where we want it to be, or where we think we want it to be. So again, click on each particle emitter, going into the translation, so the letter O to start with, going into region in the inspector, in translation, again just moving it across to the right until we get it roughly where we think we want it to be. We can move these around later on. And again, each individual one, just move it across, go to region, and the X offset, and we're starting to spell out the word that we want it to spell. So we've created the word Bouncy title, so that's great. This is the bit that takes the time, unfortunately. It's a case of creating each individual letter with particles and then moving them to where you want them to be. Obviously, if you want to move the word around, all you need to do, click on the particle renderer, hit shift space, and you can put in a transform node, XF. We can add a transform node, and then we can move this around to where we want it to be, exactly on the screen, wherever you want it to be. I want it roughly in the middle. That will do for now. Okay. So we've got the word Bouncy title. Not very exciting at the minute, but we want these to bounce around. So how are we going to start to do that? The way to do that is to, first of all, we need to give it some force. So each particle needs to be given some force so it moves around the screen. In the last merge, click on the last merge node. Again, shift space, and we want to type in PDIR to come in P directional force. Add that in. And let's have a look at what that's doing. So the P directional force, if you click on that, come to the inspector, we can see it defaults to -90 with a strength of 0.1. So what that means is 0.1 is it's got some movement. Obviously you can increase that or decrease that, whichever you want to do. And -90 means that it will drop straight down. So if we press play, it will drop straight at the bottom of the screen. So we've got some direction. And this is where we're going to set our last two keyframes, because I want the letters to hold in the screen first before they bounce off, and I want to hold for about a second. So I'm on 30 frames per second, so I'm going to come to frame 30. I'm going to click on strength, set a keyframe, up in the inspector, and again I'm going to come to the previous frame, so frame 29, and I'm going to set the last keyframe we're going to set to 0. So what that does now, again, if we go back to the beginning of the clip, it will hold the letters for 29 frames, and on frame 30, 1 second, that's when they'll start to drop out the screen. So that's what I wanted. Okay, great. So we're getting there. So now what we want to happen is for these letters to bounce around. So how do we do that? So again, I'm with the P directional force node selected, shift space, type in P bounce. And what then happens is the P bounce will then give us these little icons here, which we can move around the screen. So what I'm going to do is just to quickly move the red icon into the bottom right corner and the green icon into the bottom left corner. And effectively what this has done is this has created, for want of a better word, a trampoline. So when the letters drop out the bottom, they'll hit this line and they will bounce. So again, if I press play, they'll hold, start to drop, and we got a bounce. Okay, so we're starting to get what we want, but we can see straight away, because this line isn't exactly flat, they're starting to bounce a little bit out of sync, which might be what you want, but it's not what I want for now. So what I want is this line to be flat. So again, making sure we've got the P bounce node selected. If we go to region, you've got the start point and the end point. So again, start is the green icon and red is the end icon. The simplest way that I found to do that, what you want is the Y offset to be the same. You could just copy them in into each box. But what I've done, again, just for me, is to right click, there we go, and just set a simple expression and drag on the plus, drag it up to the start Y point. So they'll always basically be the same. Wherever you move them to, they'll be the same. So what we've got is a flat line. So now if we press play, we can see the word Bouncy title bouncing up and down. And that, again, that's starting to get what we want. So now what we want to do is to get the letters to bounce around the screen and bounce all over the place. So how do we do that? So again, making sure we've got P bounce selected. At the beginning of the clip to start with, If we come up to the inspector, click on controls, we've got various options here that we can start to play around with to see how it affects our letters. The first is elasticity, so I'm going to change that to 2 for now. Obviously you can change this as much as you want, play around with it, see what it does. If I change it to 2, what that does is each time the letters hit the line or hit our trampoline, they will bounce that little bit higher. So if we press play, we can see that it holds, starts to bounce a little bit higher, and the next time bounce a little bit higher, and it comes back down, and again higher again, and so on and so on. That might be a little bit too much, so I'm going to drop that down just a touch to, I don't know, let's try that to see what that looks like. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. What we can also start to play around with is the variance. Now, if we change the variance, that will then mean that each individual letter is then affected slightly differently. So again, you can play around with that as much as you want, but you can see each letter starts to hit the trampoline and bounce at different heights. We can change the roughness. So by changing roughness, what that means is that each individual letter moves in a random motion across the trampoline. And we can also start to change the spin. By changing the spin, again, we can see that letters starting to turn. So now we're starting to get the look that we wanted. So we go back to the beginning of the frame, hit play, just to see what this looks like. So now we can see the letters are starting to bounce around. And actually that looks quite pretty good. And they go off the screen. And that's pretty much what we wanted. Again, you can play around with these as much as you want to, change them to whatever you like. So what I've got here, just to click through that again, is as we drag it through, we can see the letters bouncing around, going off screen, and pretty much doing what I wanted them to do. But obviously we want this to work the other way. We want the letters to bounce around the screen and to create the word Bouncy title. Very, very simple to do. Again, on the last transform node, if we click Shift Space and look for time speed, and we set the time speed to -1, and what that does is that plays the clip backward. So now at the beginning of the clip, if we hit play, it will take a minute or two to render out. I'm just going to right click and take off high quality just to give it a little bit of help rendering it out. If we hit play, it'll take a little time to render out, but it will start to do what we want it to do. So there we go. So we can see that we've now got the letters bouncing around the screen, and they all come together to form the word Bouncy title, and it holds for the last second, which is exactly what we wanted. So that's great. So just one thing, if I go back to the first frame, what I don't want is the T starting right in the middle of the screen. So again, if I go back to the P bounce, I'm just going to play around with the settings until it disappears off the screen. There we go. So we're starting with a little bit of a blank screen, which is what we wanted. And the last thing I also need to remember to do is just to go into background and turn that all the way down on the alpha in the inspector. So again, just making sure that we've got a transparent background. So now we've got our effects set up. If you want to add in things like drop shadows, you can go back into each individual letter and add a drop shadow if you want to, or do whatever you want to do. But we go back to the edit page. I'm going to bring in just a random video that I've got and add in my fusion composition. Let's just crop that video so I don't need the whole thing. Don't know why I've got a thumbs up, but whatever. Just to help this render out, I'm going to select playback and just make sure I've got the render cache selected to smart, and then right click on the fusion composition and render cache fusion output to on. And again, I'm just going to let this render out. It can be quite computer intensive, so it can take a while to render out. Mine took a while. But you can see we've got the bouncy title effect, which is pretty much what we wanted. Now, one thing that I will show you just very quick. Let's say that you want to have the the words bouncy title or whatever title you put, a bit more interesting than mine, hold on the frame a little bit longer than that 1 second that we allowed for at the outset. You could obviously, when you create your fusion composition, create it for whatever length you want and set that keyframe on that p directional force to be exactly the period that you want. But let's say that you've already created this and you want to set it for a little bit longer. All you need to do is to find a point where you have the word where you want it to be, and we're going to create a freeze frame. So the way to do that is on the fusion composition. First of all, we can't do a freeze frame on the fusion composition itself. We need to create a new compound clip. So again, I'm going to create a new compound clip and click create. And again, all I need to do here is to click or right click on the compound clip, hit retime controls, and I'm going to click on the arrow at the bottom and add in a freeze frame. And that automatically will add in the freeze frame here for us, which we can extend to as long as or as short as we want it to be. So let's make it as long at the to the end of the clip. And again, what you'll need to do, unfortunately, is to allow this to render out again. But once you've done that, it will hold for as long as you want it to need. You can use the freeze frame to hold that title for as long as you want it to be. If you just simply selected this point, and for example, if you clicked File and exported an image of the bouncy title, that wouldn't work because it creates a black background. So when you bring the title back in, it just shows the word bouncy title with a black background. So unfortunately that doesn't work. So the freeze frame is the way that I found best to create this. So again, if we let this render out, so there we go, it's rendered out now. As you can see, we've got the letters bouncing around randomly and they all come together to form the title as we wanted, and it holds. And as I said, you can then use the freeze frame to stretch this out for as long as short as you want it to be. So there we go. That's my first tutorial out of the way. It probably wasn't the best, but it will get better, I'm sure. If you did like it, or you found it interesting, then remember to hit the like and subscribe. Would appreciate it. Would encourage me to do more of this sort of thing. And yeah, hope you found it good. Take it easy. See you on the next one. Ta-da.